seems that George Santos has his hand back in headlines, of course, but it's not necessarily him, but one of his aides. You remember that aide who reportedly impersonated a staff member of Kevin McCarthy, right? Well, yeah, the dude is now facing federal fraud charges. This per the Associated Press. Sam Miele, 27, was charged with 4 counts of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft in an alleged scheme to defraud donors and obtain money for Santos under false pretenses. Prosecutors said Miele used a fake name and email address to impersonate a high-ranking aide to a member of the House with leadership responsibilities. Now, Miele was also charged with aggravated identity theft, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years in prison if he is convicted. Now, Miele, who received a commission of 15% per contribution from the amount of money he raised for the Santos campaign, purported to be the McCarthy staffer to support the campaign and enrich himself through commissions, the indictment states. Miele created an email account posing as the McCarthy staffer to send solicitations to more than a dozen potential contributors and signed those emails using the employee's full name and official title, the charging document says. Now, as part of the prosecution's evidence, well, of course, there is a lot of evidence in writing. On September 26, 2022, Miele sent a letter to Santos wherein he admitted to faking my identity to a big donor. And Miele said he was high risk, high reward in everything he does. Isn't that nice? I love it, Brett, how committed the people around Santos are to fraud. It just, knowing that Santos is facing what, 13 counts right now that revolve around fraud, I'm just like, God, you're really just leaning in with your buddies too.
It's like that line in Casablanca where he's like gambling himself. It's like, I'm shocked to find out there's gambling going on here. And they're like, you're winning, sir. He's like, thank you, and he walks away. Yeah, I can't believe that someone in the Santos campaign was engaging in fraud themselves. I mean, I wonder if you get fired for basically impersonating the boss at that point. I don't know. It's just so perfect, right? The thing with Santos is when you found out more and more the things that he lied about, the more and more like you stop being shocked and kind of start being impressed. Like Eddie Izzard is a stand-up comedian, and they did who did a bit about genocide. It's gonna sound dark, but it'll get good. He's like, you kill a couple people and people are like, I am shocked. But if you kill enough people, folks are just like, you killed 100,000 people? You must get up very early in the morning. Like you can't wrap your mind around how big the lies get. And they don't directly affect me because I'm not like a Santos constituent. But at a certain point, I just kind of have to sit back and be like, you know what? Good on you. That's pretty impressive, and it's pretty awesome. And I feel like you can also get in under the radar if you're just like the person working for the guy, if you know that he is the one who probably is gonna catch the most fire for it. But then again, the person who is kind of in charge, it's like the calculation that you have to do, right? Where it's, I'm the little guy, do I escape the consequences because there's bigger fish to fry? Or do I suffer the consequences because the guy in charge is now such a high profile person that they'll just offer me to the slaughter before they'll actually get the guy who has more power than me?
Okay, so I kind of wonder if what's going on here is also getting more leverage against Santos. It's hard not to say DeSantos, because if you charge one of his buddies who happens to be close to him, and he's also facing a 13-count indictment of which he says he is innocent, it'd be great if we could have someone testify to witnessing some of Santos's fraud, because as we do know that these two, Miele and Santos, have collaborated very much so in the campaign world and outside of it. For example, this also per the New York Times, Mr. Santos and Mr. Miele have worked closely together over the years between June 2020 and January 2022. Mr. Santos's campaign paid Mr. Miele and a Florida company tied to him more than $90,000 for fundraising efforts, according to reports filed with the Federal Election Commission. A 2020 recount fund set up to aid Mr. Santos paid $15,000 more for consulting work. So, and I know there's even more about their personal intertanglements. And this really says that this individual may have information. And so now if he's facing a minimum of 2 years for each of these counts, he may be more willing to speak up. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being maybe a canary singing a bit.
Exactly, like, and the meta-analysis of this is like, this is Donald Trump's America, this is Donald Trump's party. There's ways that you've been able to lie. There's ways that you've been able to lie and get away with it for years. And most people inside the Beltway understand how that works. They realize that you're supposed to make certain promises on the campaign trail. And then when you get into a position of power, you just don't talk about that stuff anymore. That's the normal line. You say that you care about the average worker and the average person. And then when you get into that awesome office and you're making 170 plus a year and you only have to keep a couple terms going before you get that lifelong pension, you realize that you need to raise a bunch of money so that you can stay in office, and you need to deliver for the party so that you can get that kind of money. So there's a lot of people who kind of toe that line from inside their positions of power so that they can maintain the power, because that becomes more important to them than their constituents. But in Donald Trump's America, the brazen nature of the lies and the lack of accountability that he had for a good, really, there was a moment when it felt like he was going to be held accountable for the Access Hollywood tape. But that vanished. And the one takeaway was just lie, lie, lie. Doesn't matter why. Do what you can to get that money or that position. And the only thing you can do wrong is not the lie itself. It's apologizing for the lie. And so then you get these Frankenstein monster, like, Godzilla radioactive monster versions of what Donald Trump is doing in Santos and his aides. And now is the time, it seems, right? Now is the time, it seems, that everybody is actually catching the flack for it. And Trump's getting indicted. Santos's aide is getting indicted. Santos himself is being, called into question and facing some legal consequences potentially. It's just a matter of when people that have that much power have the resources at their disposal to drag their feet and prolong the consequences. And what's sad, I think I actually start, relative to the other schmuckos, I feel bad for this guy because he, the question I posed earlier, he absolutely is gonna suffer the consequences. The consequences that the more rich, the more powerful aren't gonna suffer at all probably. And if they do, won't suffer for years. And if Trump gets into office, he's probably just gonna go like he did with the Blagojeviches of the world and pardon them all for doing stuff as brazenly insane as like auctioning seats in the Senate.
Although this is pretty brazen what Miele is accused of doing, like the fact that you wrote in emails, change the name and put a name of someone else. It's just like, come on, man, how much more? It's like, this is not covert at all. You weren't stealth, you weren't smooth. Like he said, what, high risk, high reward? Like, get out of here. I actually think that to some extent, not only now can they use Miele against Santos, but also this may have a little bit of McCarthy on it, because the fact that you used my aide's name to do this, it may need to set the precedent of no, you can trade stock and use inside information, but you cannot essentially cross this line. So I'm not surprised, but I think you're absolutely right. I think this man is going to suffer, and he kind of should to a certain extent, because part of me is like, who did you think you were?
Yeah, and it's. And with the McCarthy calculations in politics, it's just number of bodies that will go along with you. A number of people to say aye when you want them to say aye, and say nay when you want them to say nay. And the calculation for McCarthy isn't whether this is right is wrong or wrong. It's whether this person is controllable or an asset to me or not. And to a certain extent, you kind of, that's just politics. It's hard to design a system that isn't gonna have an aspect of that in it. You just hope that the media ecosphere and the way that voters feel about revelations like this is such that the voters themselves and the jury in certain situations when the person is being prosecuted will say, actually, there will be consequences for the actions we all know to be not only unethical, but probably illegal.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.